Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. And in this video what I want to do is talk about Recoil. Recoil is a state management library from Facebook. Why do they create it? Because apparently people who use React want a state management library. I mean, you have libraries like XState, Redux, MobX, RxJS, all used to try to solve sort of stateful types of issues. So, what React did is like, why don't we just make a library ourselves that kind of caters to what people want, but is optimized for Facebook? And they came out with Recoil. So this is actually made by Facebook. Essentially, their answer to the question of state management, and it's really cool. Now that I'm looking into it, it's actually really neat. I kind of really like the concepts in here and the flow of how it works. Um, Essentially the basic idea is, from a shallow end, is that instead of creating like a reducer, even though technically now use reducer is a hook in React that you can use if you want, that gives you sort of a Redux-like feel. But always the issue with kind of having this sort of global state store is that, as you update it, you might create updates to components that end up rendering large parts of your component tree. And because oftentimes what happens is if you're using like something like use reducer or other libraries, it usually ends up using context, and you end up putting like a context provider at the top of your chain, and that's all fine and good. And you do that here too. You're gonna end up putting like basically a context provider at the top of your component tree. The difference is, and again, this is me some assumptions of what I think is going on in the hood, is that you're going to define all your state there sort of in a central place, but you define them in small pieces, and then the components will pull them in via hook. But what I think is what's happening is when you use the hook, you're actually creating your own internal state, but basically there's some magic going on under the end of the hook that basically allows the internal state of that component to match that, what's called an atom, that single component. I think they're using observables, based on some of the terminology I'm seeing in the docs. Okay, so that's this. Okay, so let's actually just use it. Okay, so I'm going to create a new React project. So here we are, open up a terminal, say create React app, npx create React app test recoil will be the name of the project. So while that gets all set up, let's take a look at the docs. So we're going to head over to the docs. And again, it's pretty straightforward. You install Recoil. Now let's take a look at the setup. It's just more like setup-y type stuff. Okay, but basically here's how it starts out. Back in your, essentially what you would do is, any components that use Recoil state need Recoil root. To appear somewhere in the parent tree, a good place to put this is in your root component. So again, this is basically back in our app component or in our index.js, we will put the Recoil root. Essentially, that's the context provider that provides the state. But then what's going to happen is that we are going to create atoms, okay? And essentially, this is a state that allows us, it's basically an object that represents a piece of state in our Recoil root. Okay, so essentially Recoil root is the provider, then we can define pieces of state using atom. Okay, and then, well, we'll get into selector. But let's say I have a component where I want to use that state. I would just import the use Recoil state hook. Okay, and then what's going to happen is, in using the use Recoil state hook, I can pass in the key, because again, every atom is going to have a key. And then basically what it does, it gives me back your normal like use state type setup, your getter setter, but it's bound to that key in that state. So anytime that state changes one component, it'll update in every other component that is using it, which is pretty sweet. Okay, and then you have things like selectors. Selectors are state that relate to other states. So essentially, like if you have a piece of state, this is basically a computed property if you're familiar with Vue. Essentially, like if what the value of this state depends on the value of another piece of state, this one will update whenever that one updates. Okay, and then you can use that wherever you need it. Cool. But that's pretty much it, which is pretty cool. Okay. Um, so let's just see how this is doing. Okay, so this is done. So let's cd into the folder. Okay. And let's install Recoil. npm install Recoil. Okay. Do, 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 do. Just trying to see if it. Only thing I want to clarify is where should I do all these atoms? Source will be show me where I should be declaring the atom. That's my only question. So this is to do item, use recoil state. I get that. So I'm not declaring the atom in there. Well, for now, I'll just do it in index.js. Okay, so we're going to go to source. I'm going to open up index.js. And I am going to import from Recoil. As you can tell, I just woke up, so that's why I'm mistyping everything. But I want to have recoil root. I'm going to want atom. And I don't need selector or anything else at the moment, I don't think. So let's wrap this in my recoil root. That will make that all available. And let's try to create an atom. So let's create an atom. Okay. We'll call this const to do, well, no, we're going to call it a count. We're going to create a counter. Const counter equals atom. And then we're going to pass that a thing, and that's going to have a key, which is going to just say counter. Anything else I need to provide it? Default, the default value. And the default value will be 0. Okay, so I'm going to assume that's what I needed to do. And now we're going to head over to app. I'm just going to clear this out. Okay. And what I will do is we're going to import use recoil state. So 1 second. Import from recoil. And I want to import use recoil state. Okay, and that should be const counter set counter equals use recoil state, and then we just pass in the string of counter, and that's how it knows which state we want. Cool. Let's make sure I use recoil value. What's the difference between that and use recoil state? Set to-do list, to-do list. I'll use set recoil state. I see what they did. Okay, this just gives you the value, and this just gets you the set state function. Which one gets you both? Use recoil state gets you both. I'll stick with that. Keep it simple. Okay, and then all I'm really want to do is just basically inject the counter here. Okay, so let's just run this. Let's see how it goes. npm start. And do we get a count of 0 on the screen? Expected an atom or selector, but got counter. Okay, so it doesn't like that because I have to. Let's just see where else it complains. App function const stacks were collapsed. use recoil state counter. Without having to use recoil state, expecting an atom or selector, but got counter. Okay, let me just see the way that we used it in the docs. Okay, use recoil state. Okay, so these are got to be exports. So that's for, okay. So we're gonna refactor this a little bit. I'm gonna create a new file over here called atoms.js, and I'm gonna import atom here. Import atom recoil, and I'm going to move over that atom to here. So I'll just define all my atoms in here. Index app.js atom. There we go. And it looks like we need to export these, because it looks like you don't pass a string, you actually have to pass the variable. So in that case, what I want to do here is I really want to import I'm going to want to import counter from /atom, and then pass counter over here. And let's see here, does that work? Okay, that works. Okay, cool. Okay, so it looks like we're back in action. So basically I can just define all my atoms here and then import them where I need them. Cool. Now, the benefit of this is I don't want to have to pass down props from like here and there and move state around that way. So I want to use the value here. I want to set it in another component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another component called count.js, and we'll just say function count props, even though we don't need the props. And then we're going to export default count. Okay. And then I'm going to import use recoil state from recoil. And I'm going to import counter from /atom. There we go. I'm going to bring in the thing. So const counter set counter equals use recoil state counter. And then, yeah, then I can just sit there and say, create return a button count, and then just add a click to this button on click equals, and it'll just be a function that'll invoke set counter to set counter to counter plus 1. And then there we go. So there's that. And then now we just need to use this component. So I will import count from count, and then we'll just put it right below the counter. But again, usually to change state in a component up the tree, I'd have to like to pass down a function. You know, I'd have to pass down some props. Or if I'm using reducer, I have to like bring in the whole reducer function and then define all the actions in a separate file and do all that fun stuff. If you're using RxJ observables, you actually have to create the observables and then pass them around and subscribe to them. If you're passing xstate, which is using state machines, which I haven't used, you would have to create a state machine, which is a topic for another day, because that's something I would like to sit there and have a chat about, because it's kind of it's a cool idea and concept. I just have a hard time, I've had a hard time thinking of how to apply it to complex apps, but it's something I definitely want to explore. So that's the xstate library. But let's see here. Now let's see here. I should be able to hit count here, and it should just increment, and it works. That's it. Okay, so essentially I can just define all my state as atoms and then just import them into the components I need them. And I just set my state using like use recoil state. Okay, That's pretty straightforward. Okay. And then again, what's really neat that we see here, and again, the documentation, is that we don't have to always get the setter and the getter. If we only want the setter, we can use set recoil state, which will only import the getter, and we can use recoil value, which only imports the value if you don't need both. But again, to keep it simple, you can always just use recoil state and get both, and it'll feel a lot like you're just using use state all over the place, like as you're used to. And that's easy. Okay, I like that. I like it's easy. It doesn't really like change really the workflow in React. You just don't have to pass around as many props, but you're still essentially like doing things the normal Reacty way. So I like that. I like it a lot. This is cool. This will probably be what I'll be using going forward when I build applications. But my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. You have a great day and enjoy. And again, this code will be in the video code repo, which the link is in the video description. Have a great day. Enjoy.